asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chat, believing in my own will. Wet fire, math, evil, scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill. Need to come and take it if you wanna mess with my hill. We've been 3D printing, set and ready for that ghost kill.
Hello, Canada, and welcome to another episode of the Maple Pill. As always, I'm your host, Matt McKeever, and we're back from a one-week hiatus. Did you guys miss me? I missed you guys. So definitely looking forward to jumping into a full dose of the Maple Pill tonight. We've got a lot of updates to cover, so we're going to be covering Ukraine and Russia. In addition, we'll be talking about the Freedom Trucker Convoy and some new updates around that. Particularly, I'm going to be diving down a couple rabbit holes on some of the misinformation and false flags that we talked about way back when they were happening live in the moment. And finally, now we're starting to get some confirmation there. And I think that this leads to a bigger conversation, even just about what's going on in Ukraine right now. I see from both sides a lot of propaganda coming out. It's really easy to want to jump to conclusions or, use a single story or a single source as justification for your entire worldview right now. Personally, while I guess I'll re-summarize my perspective on the Ukraine situation, and then I'll also kind of give my perspective on how to go about figuring out what's true and what's false, because at the end of the day, I think the only way we're going to know what's actually true and what's actually happening is, days, weeks, months, potentially years after the fact, unfortunately, because both sides have very strong incentives to want to mislead the general world in regards to what's playing out right now in Ukraine. I've also got some great resources, some recent podcasts that I've kind of gone down the rabbit hole on. And then finally, I've actually got what I consider to be potentially the best white pill story that we've had so far on the show. So I know oftentimes I struggle to come with some white pills for the show, but I think I've got something special up my sleeve tonight. So I'm really excited to jump into it. And enough of me rattling on. Let me get my screen share pulled up here and we'll jump into it. As always, as well, I'd love for you guys to share your thoughts, your opinions on this show, on the stories we're covering. Let me know what you're currently following in that comment section. As well, I guess one last thing I wanted to bring up before even jumping into tonight's stories is I'd love feedback on this. So ideally constructive feedback, but at this point in time, I'll take any type of feedback on the Maple Pill. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your opinion should be longer, should be shorter, more stories, less stories. One thing I can't help but wonder, I guess, is when putting together this show, I personally like kind of just flowing from story to story. However, I know from an algorithm and YouTube and big tech perspective, I'd probably be better served to actually chunk this into multiple different stories and release those stories on individual videos. But at the same time, I like the fact that we're able to have this be a two-way conversation. And so I enjoy the fact that you guys are live commenting on what we're covering here. And then at the end of the show, I can always kind of jump in and read through a bunch of the comments. So for the time being, I'm going to stick with the format, but I am open to playing or experimenting with the format. So let me know. And speaking of experimenting with the format, one last thing, tonight's show. So every Monday night, we do the mailbag. How does that go now? The mailbag Monday Marijuana Madness or whatever, something to that effect. There's like 5 or 6 M's in there. I'm going to be doing that tonight again because I got a piece of mail from you guys. So one, I really appreciate that. And if you guys ever want to send me a piece of mail, there's a PO box address in the video description down below. So really do appreciate this becoming a two-way conversation, and the fact that you guys are taking the time out of your day to write me a letter, to send me little things. Really do appreciate that. But tonight, I'm actually just going to flow straight from the Maple Pill into the mailbag show. So normally I stop them as separate live streams. I figured let's experiment and see what happens if I go a little bit longer on the total length of the show. So anyways, enough of my preamble. Let's jump into it because there's a lot of stories to cover. And we're not going to hit upon everything that happened over the last week and a half because, there's just a lot of news these days. But the first thing I want to highlight with you guys, this is from Black Box Reporter. So this was in regards to Zelensky essentially having his speech Zoom call with the Canadian Parliament. Imagine siege in Vancouver. And so he made a very powerful statement in regards to, imagine if Vancouver was under siege. Imagine if the CN Tower was essentially being bombed right now. And while these definitely are powerful visualizations for the average Canadian or Canadian politician, I do still fear a couple things in regards to Zelensky. One, how we've made him into just being essentially almost at this point in time, it feels like the golden child, a modern day god amongst mainstream media and politicians, where he can do no wrong. And by, relationship, Ukraine can do no wrong because Putin is bad. And by relation, Russia is bad. And these geopolitical situations are always far more complex. One thing I am concerned about is, again, the idea of NATO or Canada being involved in a no-fly zone in Ukraine. That certainly feels like it would be an escalation on NATO or Canada's side. And while I can understand the emotional pleas to wanting us to stand up and defend Ukraine's sovereignty and freedom, we shouldn't be making geopolitical decisions solely based upon emotions. And I think Zelensky, formerly being an actor, he's very good at pulling on the heartstrings. He's very good at presenting himself. And I can't fault him for doing that because it's in his best interest and his country's best interest for him to do that. Although I do fear that a lot of politicians outside of Ukraine are going to want to jump on this bandwagon simply because it feels like a no-lose proposition. I don't hear nearly enough dissent or challenging of the mainstream media's narrative on this story. So that is a big concern of mine. And it's one of the reasons why I know some people think I'm a Putin apologist or that I focus too much on trying to be balanced in these discussions. But I think it's important because when I look at mainstream media, it feels like a very one-sided discussion and debate. And so again, understand, I heard it, I think, best explained by Daryl Cooper or Scott Horton on a podcast I'm going to share with you guys in a second. But they essentially were breaking down, understand, you may not consider what Putin's doing to be reasonable, but it's probably a lot more rational than the way the mainstream media is presenting it to us, right? Understand that pretty much everyone that they ever wanted to go to war with is immediately framed as, a lunatic, right? As crazy, as insane, as a megalomaniac hungry for power. And, maybe it turns out that we're always the good guys and we're always fighting the bad guys, but I can't help but feel like this is just the demonization of your enemy in that moment in time. And the idea of implementing a no-fly zone over Ukraine feels like that's going to end us not on a slippery slope, but right in a free fall plummet into an escalation of war with Russia. And this feels very similar to, I think, I'm getting mixed up now. There's so many false flags and semi-declarations of wars these days. Was it Syria or Libya? I think it was Syria originally, right? Where we promised where the U.S. kind of stepped in and said they were going to implement a no-fly zone. And we continue to see that escalate until we essentially were fighting a proxy war with Russia. Not to say that we're not essentially fighting a proxy war right now in Ukraine, but there's different degrees, I guess, of proxy wars. So again, wanted to highlight this because I saw this making a lot of news over the last week in regards to Zelensky's presentation to Parliament. And while I can't fault him because it's in his own best interest, I think that we need to try and be cool and reserved in regards to approaching everything that's going on right now in Ukraine and Russia, because while I can't say exactly what's true and what's false in the moment in regards to Ukraine, I can definitely look back on things like the war in Iraq, Afghanistan, the previous war in Iraq, Vietnam, Korea, all those different conflicts. And we start to understand that it's never as one-sided or as black and white as the mainstream media would like to present to us. Next, I want to highlight this from Post Millennial because this is one of the things I'm really concerned about. Candace Bergen says Canada needs to do more to secure Ukraine's airspace. And I can't see justifying wanting to involve Canadian soldiers and have Canadians go over and die in Ukraine in order to defend Ukraine. And that may seem cold, it may seem heartless. I can appreciate that perspective, but at the same time, there's a conflict going on in the world every single day, and we don't get involved in every single conflict. And so if we're going to get involved in Ukraine specifically, I think we need a lot more than just emotional pleas to justify our further involvement. Again, we covered in a video 2 weeks ago where I was exploring, we've committed over $1 billion in Canadian assets already to Ukraine, their government, and arming them. And it's actually very difficult to even get to the bottom of how much we've actually committed, but it certainly seems like over $1 billion based upon what I broke down in that video. Next, this is from Zero Hedge. Zelensky bans 11 opposition parties labeled pro-Russian, seizes media. And again, I can understand why, if I was the president of a country that was under attack by a much more powerful nuclear power, like Russia and I was Ukraine. This seems like a very rational decision where you don't want division in your government, you don't want division in the media, and you essentially want the media just to push out your propaganda because, hey, you're in an existential fight for the existence of your country, for the safety of your people. At the same time, this is dangerous, right? And this is only going to compound the propaganda we see being pushed out in the West, in my opinion. Again, it's a complex geopolitical situation that I'm never going to be able to solve in one of these quick highlight updates. My goal is just to share with you different stories and perspectives. As always, links to everything we're discussing in the video description down below, because really don't let my quick summaries on the maple pill be your total understanding of what's going on in Ukraine and Russia right now, because that would be a wild disservice to actually what's going on. But this is important to understand that it's not as united, at least as it's presented to us here in the West in regards to what's going on in Ukraine, right? If that was the case, you wouldn't need to ban 11 opposition parties. You wouldn't need to seize the media. We wouldn't see you need to implement conscription from like 16-year-old to 60-year-old males in your country. Next, from the Ron Paul Institute, I think this is a great article. And just a good thought experiment, because again, we saw false flags in the Maiden Pool revolution back in, or protest back in 2014, 2015. We've seen discussions of it in regards to Georgia back in 2008, the previous Orange Revolution in Ukraine. So this is about, was the bombing of Mariupol theater staged by Ukrainian Azov extremists to trigger NATO intervention? And this is a very thorough article. I encourage you guys to read it cover to cover, but just want to highlight some of the introduction here. A closer look reveals that local residents in Mariupol had warned 3 days before the March 16th incident that the theater would be the site of a false flag attack launched by openly neo-Nazi Azov battalion, which controlled the building and the territory around it. Civilians that escaped the city through humanitarian corridors have testified that they were held by Azov as human shields in the area, and that Azov fighters detonated parts of the theater as they retreated. Despite claims of a massive Russian airstrike that reduced the building to ashes, all civilians appear to have escaped with their lives. And, you know, there's other stories of Ukrainian nationals and Ukrainian freedom fighters using schools to store, war supplies and to kind of stage their military campaigns. And again, this is what we often see play out in Palestine, right? Where it muddies the water and makes it far more difficult to understand what was intentional by Russia in this case, or in the past, Israel when fighting Palestine. And so again, looking at this, I just want to highlight that a lot of the things we're seeing on the news, again, is often the news jumping to conclusions and not taking enough time, in my opinion, to try and really verify what's going on. And we're going to highlight some of how at least Canadian media often gets it wrong in regards to the Freedom Trucker Convoy a little bit further into the show. Next, from the Mises Institute, we must now learn the lessons of 1914, not the lessons of 1938. And I think this is important to understand, because so often we hear references to 1938 and the Munich conference, and essentially, the Allies, Britain in particular, essentially conceding to Germany and hoping to appease them, and that will stop war. But at the same time, understand that in 1914, arguably what caused World War I and World War II was the entanglements of foreign policy and essentially the diplomatic measures from different countries, right? So all these different complex treaties that if so-and-so gets pulled in, then I go in, and that pulls in so-and-so else, and then their allies have to be pulled in. And all of a sudden, before you know it, you've got a world war over what arguably should have been a regional conflict. And certainly looking back to 1914, it's hard to not think the world would have been better served had we actually kept that or allowed that to be a regional conflict, rather than seeing Germany and Russia escalate things and really triggering the First World War. And I know a lot of different people explore threads these days in regards to, was it really, two separate world wars, or was this just one long war with an extended peace in between, right? And so certainly I think this is at least worth exploring and reading through from cover to cover. So link to that article in the video description down below. Next, if you're kind of tapped out when it comes to reading, but you want to get a good understanding of how we find ourselves here, and pulling upon some great Iraq war comparisons in regards to where we find ourselves now in regards to Ukraine and Russia, and where we found ourselves in the past in regards to Iraq and Kuwait. This Unraveling podcast, I think, is fantastic. It's Jocko Willnick and Daryl Cooper. Daryl's from Martyr Made. You guys have heard me sing his praise multiple times in that podcast. But this one, Unraveling 32, Enough Already, with Scott Horton. Scott's very intelligent, very well spoken on this subject matter. If you want to go deeper down the rabbit hole, he's actually got his own podcast. I think Scott Horton Conversations or something like that. You'll find it easily enough on your podcast app. But he's from antiwar.com. He's also from the Libertarian Institute. And again, he's just very well spoken. And I think he's very balanced in his approach to exploring the different sides of this complex geopolitical situation. Next, this is from Reuters. Canada formally removes Russia RT from Canadian TVs. So this was already announced even before I went on my quick little hiatus there. However, I thought this was worth highlighting again just because it's official. I don't think that this is a net plus in regards to freedom of speech, liberty, or even trying to fight disinformation, right? I think the more you drive this stuff underground, the more likely it is that those that seek this information end up finding themselves down even crazier conspiracy theories, because they start to see things like, oh, hey, maybe there are at least aspects of the mainstream media coverage that is inaccurate, and maybe there's actually aspects of Russia Today that is accurate or more accurate than mainstream media. That's not to say that Russia Today gets it right more often than mainstream media, but when people start to realize this, I think that they find themselves in an interesting feedback loop where it becomes very easily to start jumping to conclusions on everything the moment you start to question anything. So again, just wanted to highlight that because it's now official. You're not going to be able to find Russia Today on Canadian TVs. Now, switching gears, this is the Freedom Trucker Convoy. I wanted to start off our update with this because you guys may remember there was that arson attack that was originally ascribed to protesters of the Freedom Trucker Convoy when it was kind of at its peak height, right? It was right before the Emergencies Act, right before the protest was made illegal. And like a lot of the information we saw coming from mainstream media here in Canada, it turns out this was a huge jump to conclusions. So we originally explored the original Twitter thread in one of my videos, but just what I want to highlight now is they finally found at least one of the men that was involved. There's no sign or proof that he was really involved in the Freedom Trucker Convoy in any way. It appears that this was likely a false flag. And I think the more you pay attention to the stories that the mainstream media really blows out proportions and where it just doesn't add up, right? Think of Jesse Smollett, right? Where he essentially claimed to be attacked by pro-Trump supporters in Chicago, of all places. And essentially they tried to lynch him, but then he went to Subway after the lynching. Before talking to police, he still had his Subway bag. Again, these false flags, I think that at least some people on the extreme left in the more communist circles, they literally see the ends justifying the means. And so that means that they're capable and willing to do just about anything in order to frame the general public's perspective, right, to align with them. And I can't help but feel like this wasn't a random incident that accidentally got ascribed or projected onto the Freedom Trucker Convoy, but in fact, this was purposely a false flag meant to essentially make it easier for the general public to denounce the Freedom Trucker Convoy. So just from the article here, police say Connor Russell McDonald, 21, has been charged with arson causing property damage and disregard for human life, mischief to property and endangering life, mischief to property and possession of incendiary material. They say there is no information to suggest McDonald was involved with the convoy protest. He's scheduled to appear in court on April 1st. So again, if you guys want to read that, there's an article there from the Canadian Press. We've also got one from CTV News that really just says a lot of the same. But this feels, reminiscent of when we had CBC analysts talking about how Russia was probably involved in the Freedom Trucker Convoy, or that the majority of donations to GoFundMe was probably foreign donations from Russians. And again, it turns out that all these narratives were false. And a lot of these narratives were actually used and justified in Parliament to invoke the Emergencies Act, right? To demonize political opponents of Justin Trudeau. And this isn't the Canada I want to live in. And I don't think it's the Canada most of us want to live in either. But before even getting into some of those other stories that were disproved, I just want to highlight this from iPolitics. You're usually not going to find them. I'm usually at least not going to find myself in agreement with a lot of their articles, but I did think this was interesting. Let's face it, the Freedom Convoy won. It's as if we've moved to Florida or woken up to life under Pierre Poilievre government with a Freedom Convoy leader as health minister, writes Alan and Samuel Freeman. This feels like a huge jump to conclusions, in my opinion. One, what would be so bad about waking up in Florida? I feel like a lot of Canadians go down there usually every winter to enjoy Florida, not just their fantastic weather, but over the last 2 years, their fantastic freedom as well. Secondly, this idea that it's as if like a Freedom Convoy leader is health minister is so beyond the pale, in my opinion. Like this is clown world sort of narratives here. This idea that like, oh, we've gone to the extreme opposite now. Now, again, the pendulum does often swing to extremes, but we're still very much so on the extreme left at this moment in time. And to think otherwise is just silly and naive. And again, I can't imagine what these people will be writing if Pierre Poilievre actually does find himself as the Prime Minister of Canada, or if we actually do start to see, more freedom-oriented politicians gaining power. Next, from True North, 5 times Liberal claims about the Freedom Convoy were officially disputed. And one thing here, I think that they could have actually even done a better list here, but I really appreciate True North for putting this together. So no wealthy foreign donors. That was one that essentially from GoFundMe president dismissed these claims. Next was RCMP saw no evidence of terrorist financing, despite the fact that we were originally led to believe that was the case. Again, there appears to be really no information, no facts that the Prime Minister's office or politicians use to justify their claims against the Freedom Trucker Convoy, other than it feels like at this point in time, Justin Trudeau's mental math when it comes to dealing with political opponents is, if they disagree with me, they must be the opposite of me. And so I believe myself to be, not racist, to not be misogynist, to not be, whatever. And then so that immediately means anyone that disagrees with me must be on the extreme opposite of that spectrum, which just does a disservice to any sort of hopes of reconciliation, any sort of hopes of having open and honest dialogue here. And understand a lot of the Freedom Trucker Convoy protesters, in my opinion, they were extremely frustrated with the mainstream narrative, right? With the fact that politicians were so dismissive of them. And yet it seems like that just continues to be the narrative our politicians are doubling down on. Again, at this point in time, no one's apologized. No one's came out and said, you know what, maybe we overreacted. Maybe we shouldn't have demonized you immediately. Maybe we should have actually sat down at the table with you and heard you out. Another lie or misleading statement that was regularly made: Convoy was funded by Canadians, not foreigners. So again, originally we heard that foreigners were the ones that were funding this, right? We had the CBC essentially going in and doing some investigative journalism. I'm using air quotes here because literally they just looked at a list of donors, saw that 1/3 of them were pseudonyms or preferred not to be named, and jumped to conclusions that these all must be foreign donors. And subsequently, the CBC's actually been retracting or correcting some of their articles. But again, the damage was already done, right? We essentially had the propaganda wing of the government, the CBC, trump up stories. We then had politicians use those trumped up stories to justify the demonization of their political opponents, and the rest is history. Maybe we'll write a retraction, maybe we'll write a correction down the road, but that'll be after the Emergencies Act has been enacted. That'll be after we've convinced the general public that the Freedom Truckers are extremists, and that'll be after the fact that we froze bank accounts and essentially push them to the limits, right? And as I mentioned throughout my coverage of the Freedom Trucker Convoy, I couldn't be prouder of my fellow Canadians and my freedom maximalist friends amongst the Freedom Trucker Convoy, because so many of them, I think, were being agitated and provoked by the government and yet refused to take the bait. And that is so rare in this day and age that we don't see people just react out and lash out against one another. And again, a very proud moment for are like your fellow Canadians that were involved in the protest, but very sad day in regards to how politicians and the administration treat them. As well, we had FinTrack officials saying it was fed up people, not terrorists, that funded the convoy. So again, this is worth exploring if you guys want to dive deeper into some fact checks on what the administration and politicians originally claimed in regards to what was going on. Next, this is from Rebel News. GoFundMe lawyer on Freedom Convoy. There was a lot of misinformation around this campaign. And they're not talking about the Freedom Trucker Convoy being filled with misinformation. They're talking about mainstream media's coverage of it. So again, link to this article in the video description down below. Circling back to Blacklock's reporter, CBC pulls false convoy story. And so they've actually corrected a couple stories at this point in time. CBC News at the time claimed to have completed an exclusive analysis of Freedom Convoy donations and found suspicious contributions from foreigners. The donations identified by CBC News are likely only a fraction of all the donations made by people outside of Canada. Read a February 10th website story headline, Convoy protesters received hundreds of donations that appeared to be from abroad. In recent days, questions have emerged about how the protesters raised so much money so quickly and where it came from, said the article. Before GoFundMe shut down the protest, Convoy crowdfunding page and announced donors would be refunded. It had attracted more than 120,000 donations, amounting to more than 10 million. Both of the stories that the CBC corrected that came out on the same day, both stories were by Elizabeth Thompson, a CBC reporter who spoke negatively of protesting truckers at a public meeting of the Parliamentary Press Gallery on February 15th. Personally, I felt a little uncomfortable because there were all these guys roaming around the streets, said Thompson. Again, understand that's the reality these people choose to construct for themselves. Because there was a bunch of protesters waving Canadian flags and according to her, there was a lot of males in that group. She felt uncomfortable. Again, these are the same people that said that they felt harassed, that, there was threats of rape, all these things that are unverifiable, and the police stats don't support it, right? We literally saw crime decrease during the Freedom Trucker Convoy in downtown Ottawa versus before and afterwards, right? One other point from this that I want to highlight, the CBC on February 3rd corrected an earlier television story suggesting Russians were behind the Freedom Convoy. Television host Nil Koksla, in a January 28th broadcast of Power and Politics, claimed there is concern that Russian actors could be continuing to fuel things as this protest grows, or perhaps even instigating it from the outside. And understand, that's all they need to do is make a claim, and then it gets picked up by politicians. It gets read in Parliament. They then create this circular feedback loop of trying to think. There's a term that CIA intelligence communities use when they're essentially, they create the story and then they go and verify it, right? But it actually turns out there's only one source for the story. This is very similar to what we saw play out here in regards to the Freedom Trucker Convoy in Canada, is where you literally have one pundit say that they're suspicious of something, which is like a wet paper bag, right? It's so easy to fight your way out of it. But yet then that gets picked up in a mainstream media news headline. Then that gets read by a member of parliament, and that gets used to justify the slippery slope that we saw of tyranny implemented here in Canada during that protest. So again, it blows my mind that we as taxpayers pay for this CBC news propaganda wing of the government to demonize us. And then when they get it wrong, they essentially just, it's no big deal, right? There's no real consequences to their actions. Now from the Toronto Sun, just want to highlight this. Again, Freedom Trucker Convoy update. Ontario introduces bill aimed at tackling border blockades. And Ford said this legislation signals to the world that Ontario is open for business. To me, it's just like, okay, whatever. You're just going to keep pushing the same narrative rather than actually trying to look inward in regards to how we found ourselves at this moment in time. Now, let's get into our first blue pill story of the day. And I think we're going to be seeing a lot more headlines like this in the future. This is from the Financial Post. Canada's housing boom has been unprecedented. The fallout will be too, say these economists. And so these essentially are economists from Oxford University predicting housing markets headed for 24% correction within 2 years. Now, again, whenever we see these big headlines and talks of disaster in the housing market here in Canada, I'm trepidatious because I'm the same dude that's been reading like Garth Turner's blog since like 2006 or 7, I think. the greater fool, if you guys have never checked it out. And so he's been proclaiming and predicting the downfall of Canadian real estate ever since we saw, the big crunch in the United States. Well, certainly I expect and suspect someday there will be a reckoning. The timing and the ability of anyone to really predict these with high accuracy is very suspect, in my opinion, right? When we originally had the COVID-19 pandemic breakout here at the start of March 2020, and we went into the first lockdown, we literally had the CMHC coming out saying they expected real estate prices to correct by 20% that year. And they didn't correct by 20%. They overcorrected by 20%. So again, I understand they were literally off by 40% of that swing, right? They said it was going to drop 20%. It actually went up over 20% over the time period they were predicting. But let's see what Oxford had to say here. Oxford sees 3 triggers for the correction. First and perhaps foremost is the market itself. By late 2021, home prices were 19% beyond the borrowing capacity of median income households in Canada. The report says, and the gains since then have just made it worse. Oxford expects by mid-year, home prices will be an unprecedented 38% above what the average household can afford. And certainly, seeing that it's 38% above what the average household could afford would make you think that we would be due for a correction. But I think that's underestimating politicians' willingness to try and buy votes by creating complex rules, regulations, subsidies, grants, and things like that in order to try and help people continue to afford to pay for these overpriced assets. The second is higher borrowing rates. The Bank of Canada began its hiking cycle with a 25 basis point increase earlier this month. Oxford predicts a cautious path with 3 more hikes this year, a pause to assess the economy, and then gradual increases that will lift the rate up to 2% by mid-2024. And so again, we're already seeing a lot of pundits, a lot of analysts, a lot of economists walking back their aggressive posturing in regards to interest rates at the start of the year, right? We had one analyst from Scotiabank literally say they expected 7 rate hikes this year. Now, they were always going to find an excuse for why to not do these rate hikes, in my opinion. And I suspect that the war in Ukraine is going to be a great opportunity to, pump the brakes when it comes to aggressive rate hikes, despite the fact that we're going to see inflation continue to go crazy. The third trigger is new government housing policies. Some of the proposed national initiatives in the pipeline include a house flipping tax, temporary ban on foreign ownership, and a tax on non-resident owned vacant homes. However, that ban on foreign ownership, while it was originally a campaign promise from Justin Trudeau's Liberals, we've already seen them have the opportunity to implement that, and they chose to vote against it. So I think that this is a weaker point because, again, while I think politicians want to talk tough and talk about solutions in regards to the housing affordability issues here in Canada, I don't think they've got the teeth or the stomach to do so. And understand, again, the more you dig into Canadian politics, the more you realize, particularly the Liberal Party, but the Conservatives aren't a lot better, they receive significant funding either directly or indirectly by foreigners, right? That, participate in some of these, pay for access events, right, that are done. A 24% drop in home prices sounds scary, and in normal times it would be. So that's essentially from the Financial Post. There is this interesting chart here from the G7 countries in regards to house price growth since 2000, and you can see Canada is, over 300% at this point in time. So we're definitely leading the charge from G7 countries. I'm just not sure that this is one of those charges we actually want to be leading. So again, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you if or when a correction is coming, but definitely we're hearing rumors of it in the mainstream media. Next, this is from Reuters. Canada calls for quick end to CP rail strike amid fears of worsening commodity shortages. I think that we're about to enter strike season, let's call it, because as we see inflation continue to increase, we're now seeing it projected at, it's going to hit 6% before the Bank of Canada will see it subside. And I just not buying that narrative. I think we're going to continue to see inflation go wild for a multitude of factors. And I think that we're going to see a lot of unions, a lot of organized labor decide, no, we actually need significant wages if we just want to keep up with our grocery bill, if we just want to keep up with the price of gas. And so, again, I suspect we're going to see more pressure on our supply chain, more pressure on our production here in Canada. And I think we're going to see a lot more strikes on the horizon. And speaking of more strikes, here's one from Canoe.com. Molson workers vote for strike mandate over issues of wages. Now, this was only 320 workers, so it's not like it's a massive percentage of the Canadian worker force, but the fact that 99% voted against the company's offer, I think, is telling. And again, I think we're going to see a lot of unions and organized labor pushing back and demanding much more aggressive adjustments for inflation in regards to the wages their members get paid. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. Are you part of a union? Are you part of organized labor? What do you expect, right? Are you expecting to see more aggressive negotiations or renegotiations of existing contracts because inflation's going wild right now? Are your wages truly protected from inflation, through inflation adjusted policy in those previous agreements? Let me know in the comment section. Next from Rebel News, Fed's launching review of mandatory jab policy for public sector employees. Chief Public Health Officer Theresa Tam recently stated the government would be reviewing its mandatory COVID vaccine policies. And so essentially what you'll hear here is talked about, they're moving from an emphasis on requirement to an emphasis on recommendation. And this is just more fucking bullshit, right? They're just going to drag their feet in the hopes that they can bully and ostracize more of the Canadian public into getting vaccinated, into getting boosted, into making decisions they don't want to do about their medical future, because politicians just don't see why you or I should ever disagree with them. We should just shut up and do as we're told, because we're really just an asset to a lot of these politicians. We're not actual human beings, right? They view us as NPCs that are just supposed to be lemmings, that if they tell us to walk off that cliff, we're supposed to walk off that cliff and do it with a smile on our face. Next from Post Millennial, just inflation. Polyev rips into Trudeau as inflation soars. I just kind of want to use this as a jumping off point and get your thoughts and opinions on Pierre Poilievre. I think he could make for a great finance minister. I'm just not sure that he actually represents who or what I'd want to see as prime minister. He's a career politician. When it seems politically expedient, he seems to speak up for freedom. He's, flirted with having discussions with some Bitcoiners. So while I hope that he's secretly orange pilled and maybe he's going to be a Manchurian candidate for Bitcoin, I've got my doubts there. But I was recently in a Twitter space, or maybe it was a Clubhouse space, with a bunch of Bitcoiners, and they were discussing whether they think, should we all rally around Pierre Poilievre and, shun other parties like the PPC or individual independents, in the hopes that this is the best scenario, best realistic scenario we've got. While I understand and even sympathize with that perspective, for me, it's a tough pill to want to swallow. I just think that it's so easy for politicians these days to be co-opted, whether it's directly or indirectly, right? I don't doubt that some people actually get into politics with good intentions. I just doubt that many are able to survive for an extended period of time in politics with those good intentions. Now, moving into the first Red Pill story of the day, I just found this interesting because it felt very patronizing. This is from the Toronto Sun. Paranoid Hollywood turns to panic rooms as crime spikes. And so they're essentially talking about, this is more treated like lifestyles of the rich and famous, and talking about how people with even as cheap of houses as 4 or 5 million in California, in Hollywood, are choosing to install panic rooms. If you've actually been paying attention to what's going on in the hellscape that is California these days, from a public policy and just like violent crime and thefts and all that, it doesn't seem like they're paranoid, in my opinion. This just seems like proactively protecting you, your family, and your valuables. I think that we're going to see stuff like this become more and more popular in large urban centers. Personally, I don't understand why the hell anyone wants to live in a large urban center when we've got things like Starlink that allows me to connect to the internet in the middle of nowhere, so that when the angry mobs decide to, freak out because there's not enough bread or circuses or whatever triggers the mobs. If I'm living in an urban center, I would absolutely appreciate having a panic room. I don't think you need to be paranoid to think or want those things in your life. And if you've got the discretionary income, it actually seems kind of reasonable, in my opinion. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, your opinions. Do you think, is it just paranoid Hollywood that's choosing to implement panic rooms? Or do you think that we're going to see this become more mainstream for individuals that for whatever reason, choose to stay in those large urban centers. Now from the Globe and Mail, police believe attack at Mississauga Mosque was motivated by hate. You guys probably saw this making the rounds in the Canadian news cycle. And, as I've learned more about government policies, as I've dived deeper into these subject matters, personally, I don't like the idea of hate crimes. And I know that that's controversial, and particularly controversial in Canada. But I think that, looking at the underlying motive of a crime can make sense to a certain extent, right? Like, was something in self-defense? Would a reasonable person do what you did in that situation? However, the moment we start to really stigmatize these things, I can't help but feel like it's more designed to push a certain narrative, right? I feel like a lot of people are going to read the headline here and just be like, police believe attack at Mississauga Mosque was motivated by hate. I think a lot of people are just going to jump to conclusions and be like, there must be Freedom Trucker Convoy protesters, must be, Trump supporters, or whatever the mainstream media has trained you to believe at this point in time. And I think it just does disservice to everyone. But Peel Regional Police said the attack started around 7 a.m. on Saturday when a man walked into the mosque and discharged bear spray toward people who were praying. Members of the mosque were able to subdue the attacker until police arrived. A 24-year-old Mohammed Moise Omar was arrested in relation to the attack. Peel police have charged him with offenses that include assault with a weapon, administering a noxious substance with intent to endanger life, uttering threats, and mischief to religious property. In a Saturday news release, the force said the attack was believed to be a hate-motivated incident. So again, I don't think that we need to have hate crimes, straight up, right? I don't think that we should have language laws that restrict hate speech, right? Unless you're literally inciting violence in the moment, in which case we've already got that covered with existing legislation. But I think very soon we're going to see almost everything that's associated with mental illness actually reframed as being a hate-related crime, and that's going to be used to take away more and more of our freedoms and rights. That's just me. You guys already know I'm a bit of a conspiracy theorist, so take it for what it's worth. Next from the National Post, Matt Strauss, I'm a doctor. Here's why I'm done with masking. And I can believe how controversial this shit still is, that like people are freaking out because we finally opened up here. I forgot to mention that off the top of the show, but we're finally opened up here in Ontario in regards to masking, right? And you can still wear a mask. Those of you that want the security blanket that is a mask or a face diaper, like, by all means, continue to do so until your heart's content. But this desire to force your personal choices on other people, no, absolutely not. It's been 2 years too long already, and this shouldn't be controversial in any way. And, I saw some crazy ass tweets going around Twitter today from parents that were like, oh my God, I broke out in tears because of joy because I saw the fact that the bus driver was wearing a mask when he picked up my kids, who are always going to be masked. And I just like, God damn, you do not have enough going on in your life if you're breaking down in tears because your bus driver did or didn't wear a mask. Straight up. Like, God damn, you want to talk about checking privilege? That's some privilege maybe that could be justified in being checked. Next from Global News, Canada's spy agencies have held back information from Parliament's watchdogs. This isn't a surprise. We've talked about in regards to the 2 Chinese scientists that were fired from, it was a Winnipeg laboratory, right? And the government or the agencies just say it's integral to national security, so we can't tell even the politicians about what the hell is going on. And we saw when Aaron O'Toole was the leader of the opposition, he refused to essentially accept that and wasn't appointing new members to this watchdog board. And subsequently, once he got pushed out, we saw a compromise from Candace Bergen. I'm always going to err on the side of transparency. And so I think that the bar should be so high in regards to the government being able to justify keeping something secret that I imagine that there'd almost be no secrets in the world if I was made dictator for a day. But let's just highlight a couple points from the article. Should this continue, the ability of the committee to fulfill its statutory mandate will be compromised, the committee warned in recently published documents. The statement has drawn concern from national security experts, especially given the relatively new committee has had its share of challenges since being established by the Liberals in 2017 national security reforms. Canada was a laggard among close security partners in providing parliamentary public oversight into the country's growing national security and intelligence apparatus. I don't know if NISICOP, is that how we pronounce this acronym? NSICOP, changed that, giving security cleared parliamentarians access to intelligence and decision makers within the intelligence community. And understand, Canada's already kind of a running joke amongst our Five Eyes allies. But, things like this are going to make us a joke amongst our locals as well, right? I don't see why anyone would trust the government at this stage. If you have, I just feel like you need to study history or even just recent events a little bit further. The Conservative Party also decided to boycott the committee after the Liberal government withheld information on the firing of 2 Chinese scientists from a sensitive infectious disease laboratory in Winnipeg. If you remember, the timing of this was interesting because shortly after we had that crazy pandemic. So again, encourage you guys to go read this entire article from Global News. Next, from Rebel News. Couple allegedly kicked off via rail train for not masking between sips. Now, this already just seems like silliness in my opinion. The one thing I did want to highlight, though, is when you actually watch this clip, actually, let's watch it together.
And don't forget to make everything erased from her phone from me. Well, we'll ask her, okay? Thank you. All right.
This is the guy. Okay, so now he's physically...
So, literally, in, 8 seconds, he goes to the police and he says, erase everything off of her phone because he must have been filmed when there was a disagreement over there, whether they're wearing masks in between sips or not. And then secondly, he just swats her cell phone, right? And the police will essentially carry the water here, a bit of the Via Rail employee, and be like, well, you can't put a phone directly in someone's face. And yet, understand, she doesn't really change it. The policeman's able to walk in between them. I would say if you're at least one body's width separate, you're not really all up in someone's grill. And when that person's already asked for you to delete all the footage off your phone, or ask the police to delete all the footage off your phone, I mean, that seems like a very justifiable thing to want to record, in my opinion. Again, I don't know the whole story here. For all I know, these people could just be jerks that were just causing a scene. But certainly the bit we see here on camera makes me not want to trust the Via Rail employee. And just the sooner we can just end the entire facade of masking, I think the better we all will be for it. Next, from CBC, woman outraged CIBC job application suggests traditional regalia for video cover letter. And here's one of those unintended consequences of wokeism, right? The desire to be so politically correct. So essentially, CIBC decided they needed to hire more Indigenous people. So they hired Indigenous group to create questions for a bank in regards to what was a customer service employee position. And so this lady here, Christine Paquette, 21 of Winnipeg, she applied to it. And like some of the things they ask her here, like, again, if this wasn't, done in the cloak of wokeism, this would feel like the most tokenism thing you could do, right? Is be like, well, prove to me how Indian you are, right? Prove to me how Indigenous or First Nations you are. Like, dress up in a head thing and like do a dance for me and stuff like that. Because that's pretty much what they actually asked here. So the questions continued. How would you describe your communication skills? Tip. Why don't you show us instead, the application read, and went on to encourage Indigenous applicants to let their personality shine in a video cover letter and to write a song, poem, dress in traditional regalia, or bring in backup dancers as part of the video submission. This isn't America's Got Talent here, guys. This is a customer service role, right? And this young lady rightfully points out, she's like, I assumed the fact that I was bilingual, that I spoke English and French would be useful for this. Instead, what they wanted to see me do was dress up as an Indigenous person and be that token for them. Like, goddamn. This is ridiculous. And this is the direction we're headed in, right? And so what does this actually boil down to? Was it then going to be the CIBC's, hiring committee to decide, like, who was the most indigenous of all those dancers we saw, right? Or like who looked the most like a token indigenous person that we can hire. Let's actually just focus on meritocracy. How about we just let the best candidate actually get the job, right? Is that too crazy to ask in this day and age? I know it is, but it shouldn't be, I guess, is what I'm trying to say there. Next from True North, Canton Natel, I went to Carleton's journalism under siege event, and the legacy media know they're flawed. So we discussed this briefly, right? But there was a legacy media panel that was done at Carleton University for their journalism school. And essentially, one, they only brought in, mainstream media perspectives there. But it is just interesting to read the breakdown of it. The MC began by acknowledging that the relationship between the Canadian public and the legacy media has changed, and Harewood recognized an erosion of public trust. Yeah. And honestly, I feel like an erosion of public trust is being generous. But maybe that's just me. Maybe that's just us. Panelists mentioned how journalism used to be a blue-collar profession, but that today, legacy media journalists are seen as part of the social elites. The majority of these social elites live and work in cities, as legacy media offices are usually found in downtown cores. And what's interesting is they go on to essentially shit on citizen journalists and saying, like, there should be a certain amount of training and things like that. And at one point in time, one of the CBC's panelists on this essentially says they don't believe they should be objective. They just need, what was the actual phrase here? I should have highlighted it. But they essentially were saying they don't believe they need to be objective. Okay, here it is. CBC's George Barrera answered the question by stating that he does not think journalists should be objective, but rather impartial. He added that as a journalist, he is aware of his biases. The panel was then asked about citizen journalists who, along the independent reporters, played a crucial role in covering historic Freedom Convoy protests in Ottawa. So, you know what? If you actually have your own media outlet, I've got no issue. You can be as biased as you want, right? It would still be great if you were impartial and objective, but for CBC to say they don't have to be objective tells you everything you need to know. Let's defund the CBC yesterday, right? Let's take back that $1 billion plus. Hey, for all I care, you can ship it over to Ukraine. It'd probably be a better use of our money than having the CBC just whittle away over $1 billion a year. Next from Blacklock's reporter, speaking of the CBC, CBC TV libel worth $1.95 million. So the CBC had to settle a libel case where they had to dole out $2 million. But hey, there's not really consequences here because it's our money, right? It's taxpayer money. So, CBC is not going to actually learn their lesson or try and care more about journalism. They're just going to move on, like they did with the Freedom Trucker Convoy stories. Now let's get into our first black pill story of the day. And this one's kind of a doozy, in my opinion. Senator gripes about protests against Chinese communism in Trudeau. So if you guys haven't been paying attention, there's still a lot of protests going on here in Canada because despite being a fringe minority of racists, misogynists, and now rapists, as we've heard some politicians claim, it turns out a lot of Canadians are still frustrated with their government and still actually want accountability and want their freedom back. But this just shows to me, well, let's just read her exact quote here. So this is from Senator Donna Dasco, who originally, I think she was a pollster that got appointed to the Senate, right, by Justin Trudeau. These loud marchers today in downtown Toronto remind me of the occupiers of Ottawa that I saw last month. Against vaccine mandates, against Chinese communists, against the World Economic Forum, anti-Trudeau, demanding freedom and more. Could you imagine the gall of these plebs believing that they should be free, believing they should be able to speak out against Chinese communists, believing they should be able to speak out against their prime minister? Beyond the pale. Like, this is just so tone deaf, in my opinion, that like Senator Donna Dasco, you obviously live in an echo chamber where the only thing you consume is liberal media, and it shows. Why should you be appointed on the Senate when you literally don't see why Canadians would want to protest the things you laid out here, right? There's not a single thing that she says there that I consider unreasonable. Vaccine mandates, yeah, they should be protested because we should have bodily autonomy. Chinese communists, yeah, communism is responsible for a hell of a lot of deaths, right? You want to add up what Stalin and Mao essentially accomplished over their reigns, it's a lot of fucking deaths. In fact, it's the most amount of deaths. Then World Economic Forum, yeah, why should plutocrats have control of our politicians? Doesn't seem unreasonable to me. Anti-Trudeau. Yeah, you should be able to speak out against your prime minister. Actually, that's one of the signs of a free society. And demanding freedom and more. Oh my goodness. I just got no patience for these people. These people that can get you canceled these days. Thankfully, she's white, so I don't think I'll get in trouble. True North. Victoria property owners to pay voluntary reconciliation tax. This is just asinine, silly virtue signaling. And one of the big things that I didn't see broken out here, and maybe it's on me for not doing more research, but I think technically, if they're paying this voluntary property tax, I don't think that's tax deductible. Whereas if they just donated to an Indigenous charity, it would be tax deductible. So I literally don't understand, but they're essentially saying, hey, if you want to contribute 5 or 10% or more, or whatever amount you want to a reconciliation fund, you can do so via your property taxes. This is just like, this is the definition of virtue signaling, in my opinion. And I can't imagine people are just going to be like, yeah, you know what? I want to pay more taxes. Why wouldn't you just donate directly to it? Why wouldn't we just allow the free market and free individuals to choose where they want their donation dollars to go? It's just silliness. We're just run by a group of clowns these days. And speaking about how clownish some of our fellow citizens are, strangely logical correlation of vaccination status with geopolitical views. And again, this isn't surprising, really, but it turns out if someone responds that they're unvaccinated or vaccinated, it turns out their views vary dramatically in regards to Russia. Those that are, good NPCs that just believe whatever mainstream media says, they believe like, let's just go to war with Russia pretty much, right? Like there's nothing too much that we shouldn't be doing, right? We should provide Ukraine with fighter jets is what 52% of vaccinated people said versus 15% that are unvaccinated. Again, if it shouldn't matter your vaccination status, but I think it is very telling that people that just do as they're told always do as they're told, I guess. And it kind of makes me scared about democracy, right? Because democracy is really just the tyranny of the majority. And the majority of people either don't care or don't have time to care about actually understanding what's going on in the world. They'd rather just trust their politicians, cross their fingers, and hope that it works out somehow, or that at least politicians don't get in their way that much. Next from Blacklock's reporter, Cabinet admits Hunter's ban. And now this is about Hunter Biden, but we're going to get to him in a second. But Cabinet yesterday, for the first time, acknowledged its national ban on military-style assault weapons includes hunting rifles. And this is a big deal. Enforcement of the ban proposed by the Emergency Preparedness Minister, Bill Blair, is now delayed 18 months amid Indigenous complaints and cost overruns. In order to allow further time to come into compliance with the law, the amended amnesty order extended the expiry date. Staff wrote in a regulatory impact analysis statement, a ban on the possession and sale of some 1,500 types of weapons to take effect April 30th is now delayed until October 30th, 2023. And just no. The answer should just be a hard no here. We've already got more than enough gun laws here in Canada. And you guys know that Stats Canada doesn't even track the crimes commit. This just came out, and I just didn't have time to fit in today's stories. But Stats Canada admitted and announced they're going to start tracking the amount of gun crimes that are caused by illegal firearms. Yeah, I got sneaking suspicion that's going to turn out that criminals don't care about your gun regulations. And so the idea that you're going to punish law-abiding Canadian citizens for daring to want hunting rifles or even just self-defense guns, right? Like there should be nothing wrong with owning a gun. There should be something wrong with using the gun against your fellow citizen, but we shouldn't just demonize tools in general. And I can't help but feel that Canada is worse for not having a Second Amendment. This is from Glenn Greenwald, and this is really worth reading from cover to cover. The New York Times now admits the Biden laptop, falsely called Russian disinformation, is authentic. The media outlets which spread this lie from ex-CIA officials never retracted their pre-election falsehoods, one used by big tech to censor reporting on the front runner. And honestly, the more you dig into both Russiagate and Ukrainegate and Hunter Biden's laptop, the more you realize that, like, oh, we actually are also just led by oligarchs and plutocrats here in the West. It's just they have to jump through a few more hoops, right? But we literally saw 51 former intelligence officials signed a letter casting doubt on the provenance of the New York Post story on the former vice president's son. And studies have came out, or polls have came out after the American election that found a significant portion of people would have been influenced had they understood the complexities of this situation, as well as known that it was fucking true. And again, this feels very reminiscent of Hillary Clinton running her own email servers, of the Steele dossier, right? Of what we're learning right now in the Durham report. And I don't know how we fix such a corrupted system. I don't think you can, straight up. I don't think you can. And
they love a good story.
They don't just love a good story.
Here's
they
a clip
love a
from
narrative,
Joe Rogan.
and they're willing to ignore facts to push that narrative. That's what scares me. What scares me is, I think there are objective journalists that work for the Washington Post and New York Times, and there's real solid journalists out there. But I don't necessarily know if you're getting all the information. I think it's safe to say that some fuckery is afoot. I mean, the New York Times just now is admitting that the Hunter Biden laptop is real. And we remember from the debates with Trump bringing it up to Biden, and Biden saying it's bullshit and it's a lie, a flat out lie. Everybody knew it was a lie. The New York Post had that story that was banned from Twitter, which was just outright crazy. That one of the oldest newspapers in the country.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's going to go back and apologize to them.
No one's apologized.
But there's a dynamic here. I mean, I love this topic in a sense, not so much because of whatever the fuck Hunter was up to, but in part because now when you look at the liberal Dems and the progressives, it doesn't matter to them. If you read some of the narrative that is out there now, the social media in the past day or so, ever since the New York Times came out with this, they're just dismissive of it, right? And they don't care.
And this is a big point here. I recently saw something where I think it was AOC was making a comment. It might have been in regards to Jesse Smollett or one of the other recent hoaxes. And it essentially was talking about how something was factually incorrect, but morally correct. And this is the point in time we're at. It literally feels like, from my perspective, that one side, at least a fragment of one side of the political spectrum, believes in their worldviews so thoroughly that facts and logic are just cumbersome obstacles in the way to implementing their policies. And then we've got at least one fraction of the other side of the political spectrum that's like, no, I actually think the truth and facts matter, that we should be approaching things in rational, logical manners. And I don't know. Either I was just brainwashed by white privilege into believing that facts should matter, that while sometimes it's hard to get to the bottom of the objective truth, that we should still strive for such things, right? That we shouldn't just denounce something because it doesn't fit within our political worldview, regardless of what the facts are. This is a big black pill, in my opinion. If you guys haven't spent time going down this rabbit hole, will you be better for doing it? Probably not. But if you're on the fence about really hating the system, the administration, and career politicians like Joe Biden, this will push you over the edge, and you will be thoroughly black-pilled. And one last thing here, must read. Randa Devine asks why Russian oligarch Yelena Baturina, who paid $3.5 million into a bank account associated with Hunter and his business partner Devin Archer, was not sanctioned along with other oligarchs allied with President Vladimir Putin this month. And yeah, I think that this is a reasonable line of inquiry. Again, does this immediately mean it's a smoking gun? No, but it's hard to not want to jump to conclusions when we've seen all the other messes from the Biden family at this point in time turn out to be true. And just want to highlight this from Jordan Peterson, because I personally feel like this describes the average Canadian to a T, right? The average Canadian that's non-confrontational, that believes themselves to be a good, agreeable person. And because they're good and agreeable and nice by their own personal definition, they essentially allow psychopaths to dominate the discourse, to hijack the narrative.
Agreeable people are very generous and kind, and they're not backstabbing, and they're empathetic, and they're self-sacrificing. But there have been computer simulations by evolutionary biologists of what happens if you get agreeable people together. So imagine you have a population of people, and all of them are agreeable. And so they're cooperating away. It's all very kind and nice. But if you put one person in there who has psychopathic traits, he just takes over everything. And so the agreeable people always have the problem of how do you handle free riders, cheaters, and psychopaths.
Right.
And, you might be utopian and say, well, those people just don't exist and they shouldn't exist and we shouldn't structure our societies that way. But that ain't going to cut it, because psychopaths are always 3% of the population. They vary between 1 and 5. And so agreeable people are very generous.
So again, I think those of us that are of the agreeable disposition, we actually have a duty and an obligation to society, to future generations, to speak out, to speak the truth, and try and drive accuracy in regards to the narratives and facts that are presented to us. Now, moving on to the clown pill. This is like the perfect clown pill, in my opinion. The Babylon Bee suspended by Twitter over parody article about Rachel Levine. So literally, the Babylon Bee wrote a parody article, and essentially in that parody article referred to what is a biological male as a biological male, and thus found their account suspended for violating the Twitter rules. This is where we're at. And I've seen some interesting discussions and debates recently around, even using terms like biological male is almost a sign of like admitting defeat to a certain extent, because you're kind of playing into their hand. They being the progressive NPCs that are social justice warriors that belong to the alphabet soup organizations. And yeah, I kind of understand how people are wanting to take more and more of a hard line against this, because we're going to see our language corrupted to the point that it's almost going to be difficult to have a normal conversation, right? You're going to have to confirm with someone what their pronoun is in the moment before you can involve yourself in discourse with them. And I've mentioned before, we highlighted it previously. I think James Lindsay does a fantastic discussion, deep dive into these subject matters. Really encourage you to check out some of his content if you haven't done so. But yeah, this is just bizarre that the Babylon Bee, like they've already on Babylon Bee news articles, they'll like fact check them, right? And say like, this is misleading or da da da. And it's like, yeah, a parody should be misleading, right? Like that's why it's funny, is because it's not the truth. Because most of the time, the truth now in our society just makes you want to cry. But this is, I think, the biggest white pill story that we've had on the show to date. And it's easy to overlook it, and it's not going to get a lot of mainstream media coverage or press, but this is massive. And God willing, the administration in El Salvador, the president, doesn't get assassinated before they're able to actually implement this. But breaking, El Salvador has 1.5 billion demand for its 1 billion Bitcoin bond from the Financial Times. And this is like, I literally have goosebumps right now thinking about it. Because fuck central bankers, fuck the International Monetary Fund, fuck World Economic Forum. This is a small, albeit small country making a massive leap for itself and trying to set itself up for a long-term future. And if this plays out, I hope that game theory takes over and we start seeing South American and African nations and countries no longer having to choose between, the IMF or China's Belt and Road Initiative, having to sell out to CIA operatives or to Russian or Chinese operatives. I actually really hope that we're going to see countries and even hopefully microstates pop up and be able to start really defending their financial freedoms through these sort of issuance of Bitcoin, of Bitcoin bonds and assets and things of that nature. Essentially, what the goal here is to build a Bitcoin city, right? So they want to build, like, I'm going to call it a futuristic city, but a city in El Salvador that's also going to mine and tap into the volcano energy that El Salvador has. And again, if you understand Bitcoin, the halving cycle, the history of Bitcoin, it seems very probable, in my opinion, that being able to structure your sovereign debt this way will literally allow El Salvador to be issuing bonds and be richer for it in the future, right? Where what we see right now is essentially every world government is just a cuck to the International Monetary Fund, to central bankers, to a handful of powerful families you may want to ascribe it as. But this is a huge step, and this makes me so bullish for the future. This is the biggest white pill I could hope for, and I hope it plays out. I hope no one gets assassinated, and I hope that this is just the beginning. It's also going to presumably be a bullish sign for Bitcoin. And again, I encourage you guys, if you haven't done any research into Bitcoin, start going down that rabbit hole. Just start informing yourself a little bit more. I think that you're doing yourself a disservice by at least not educating yourself, right? At least educate yourself to the point where you can make cognizant arguments against Bitcoin, other than like, I don't know, maybe it's a honeypot. No, like, go deeper into it, please, guys, for your future, because I want to see as many freedom maximalists end up on the Bitcoin bandwagon, because if it's essentially Web 2 bros, or VCs and governments, or it can be just sovereign individuals that rush into Bitcoin. I'd rather it be sovereign individuals. So here's also a link to a Reuters article. El Salvador says Ukraine is factor in Bitcoin-backed bond timing. So again, this was kind of pushing some FUD in regards to the fact that El Salvador pushed back. The release of this originally was expected March 15th to March 20th. Obviously, we're past that date, but I don't know. If they're actually oversubscribed by 50%, that is only a net positive, in my opinion. And again, this is a huge white pill moment, and I'm just happy to have some of those. And here's another white pill moment that involves Bitcoin. And I think because the Emergencies Act is over, this isn't illegal for me to say now. But from CBC News, digital currency donations for Freedom Convoy evading seizure by authorities. Yeah, it's almost like that's the point of Bitcoin. And so the CBC does a very basic breakdown of some of the things that went on, and essentially how the RCMP were only able to freeze about 5.9 Bitcoins, or 30% of the over $1 million that was donated to the Freedom Trucker Convoy. And again, had the individuals that were involved in this kept it all in, well, maybe that's a bit of an oversimplification, but had they primarily kept it in non-custodial accounts, and had they not been like public figures or made themselves publicly known, the government wouldn't have been able to stop any of it. They wouldn't have been able to freeze any of it. So again, could they track it? Yes. Could they freeze it? No. And that's an important and big distinction. So again, encourage you guys. This is probably some of the most in-depth reporting you're going to find from CBC News. And I don't think the average CBC reader is going to walk away with this being a white pill for them, but this is actually a big white pill. And again, it's just one more reason why, if you're not taking Bitcoin serious, you seriously should start. So let's round out today's episode with the meme of the day. This one's a cartoon, actually, but I really enjoyed it. Why do you tax carbon? To disincentivize carbon usage. Why do you tax businesses? To disincentivize business. Oh, wait. Yeah. So again, show me on the doll what taxing does. Does it disincentivize something? Is it about making someone pay their fair share? Is it just the cost that you have to pay in order to participate in society? Why do you have to when the governments can just print and press goes burr? Yeah, all good questions. And the carbon tax is just a tax grab. It's just them trying to force policy down our throats. Well, again, understand that we saw this play out in the EU already, where they carved out an exemption in their restricting gas and diesel motors for yachts. Because hey, rich people need to do rich people shit. But plebs shouldn't be able to own a gas engine because they're just the dirty poors. And that's honestly how a lot of the World Economic Forum, how a lot of the elites, the plutocrats, view us. And again, I'm in the same boat. They don't give a shit about me. And they definitely don't give a shit about any of us that are just average people that actually just want to be left alone, that don't want to take over the world, that don't want to force our world or political views on others. And so, as I mentioned, we're going to be doing the Mailbag Monday episode. But quickly, I'm going to hit some of your comments first. And then we'll take a I'll be playing the mailbag theme song while I quickly run and refill my glass of water and stuff like that. And then we'll jump into tonight's mailbag. And I've got a really cool letter to share with you guys, or at least it looked cool. I didn't actually get too deep into it. What's up, Terry? Appreciate you jumping in the comments. What's up, Graham? We got Benjamin. We got we missed you. Appreciate it, Benjamin. I missed you guys too. Hungarian Experiment, of course, in the chat. We've got Rainmaker in the chat as well. Is that Cobweb? I'm not sure what that means. What's up, everyone? This is Hungarian Experiment. Glad to see the Mayfield Bill back after 1 week hiatus. Yeah, it's good to be back. Episode 46. By the end of this week, we'll hit episode 50. Really looking forward to that. Terry, yeah, Mailbag Monday. Time to wind down after heavy stuff. Yeah, it does feel that way. It just kind of eases me into the week. Free Faster, welcome back. Was missing my favorite new show last week. I appreciate that, Free Faster, and I appreciate those of you guys that, you know, do things like smash the like button, hit subscribe, that even, you know, do crazy things like follow me on Instagram. So again, if you guys want to follow right there, Matt McKeever Unfiltered. Farzana, did you see the backlash Peter Schiff got for merely commenting on Zelensky's choice of clothing when he addressed the U.S. Congress? He was getting crazy hate mail and death threats. Oh, was that where he appeared to have like an iron cross? I didn't see that, but yeah, it wouldn't shock me to learn that, you know, NPCs, they're just like, I've always thought of the human brain as like a computer, and computers can kind of be programmed to do just about anything within their capacity, right? And so I wish it wasn't so easy to program our fellow citizens into becoming NPCs that just froth at the mouth the moment someone disagrees or even dares challenge the mainstream narrative. I've also seen some interesting discussions around, it appears that some of Zelensky's recent videos have been done in front of green screens. Someone was showing how he did a hospital visit and the photos were taken at that hospital, and it appeared that it had the wrong type of electrical outlet, and that those electrical outlets aren't prominent in Ukraine, but are prominent in Poland. So there definitely seems to be lots of suspicions and rumors flying around right now. What the heck happened to freedom of speech? People don't have to agree with Pete Schiff, but he doesn't need to be killed off for making a comment. So intolerant. Absolutely. And it's wild that the people that claim to be the most tolerant actually end up seeming like they're the least tolerant individuals amongst us. It's almost like they project whatever they actually feel onto others, right? Like, you know, those that dress in blackface call others racist. Those that have sexual allegations against them call everyone else misogynist and rapists. Again, it's interesting where we find ourselves at. Terry says, if Russia wanted to obliterate, I don't know why I struggled with that, obliterate Ukraine, it would have by now. Something else is going on. Yeah, I definitely understand that perspective. I don't think that Russia's going full tilt on this. I think they are still, well, they're not trying to necessarily win our hearts and minds. I think they are trying to keep themselves from looking like the bad guy, at least to the Russian ethnic individuals in that part of Ukraine. Again, that's not to say like Putin, in my opinion, is not good guy. He is not the good guy in this situation, but that also doesn't mean that automatically anyone that's against Putin is inherently good guy then, right? I think it's possible for there just to be like, two bad situations. And the biggest losers right now are Ukrainian citizens. The second biggest loser are Russian citizens. And I'm done with wanting war in general, right? We actually just need to dial back a lot of the rhetoric, the jump to conclusions, the demonization of the other. And more the citizens just need to actually start taking responsibility for ourselves, right? And like I think that does start with like Russian soldiers, right? Like if literally the average man, if the average soldier just refused to go to war for the bankers and the elites and the plutocrats, they're not going to send their own sons. They're not going to actually get into the trenches and try and, I know there's not trenches, but they're not going to get into the trenches and try and fight these fights. It's only because there's no direct cost to them that they're willing to fight these wars. And I think we all just need to speak out about it a lot more. Darlene says, I hope Canada will stay out of this war. Absolutely agree with you. And again, that doesn't mean that I wouldn't love to just snap my fingers and have Ukraine go back to not being invaded by Russia. But again, there's a huge. We shouldn't be viewing this so black and white, I guess, is the point I'm always trying to make here. I might make it poorly, but it is the point I'm trying to make. Bite Hunter, I think the Ukraine should do whatever it takes to resolve conflict with Russia. I'm praying for both countries. Appreciate that, Bite Hunter. Yeah. And again, I'd like to think that there was a version of reality where we didn't have to find ourselves in this moment. But honestly, it would probably start back in like the early 2000s or even the late 90s in regards to the expansion of NATO and things like that. Again, that doesn't justify Putin's choice to invade Ukraine, but I think it helps understand that there's a rational view of his actions here. I don't think he's the crazy madman that they just want us to believe. Russia said it wanted Ukraine's army disbanded, most likely in part of Azov. But what happens when Ukraine can't defend themselves? Disband the Yahtzees. I'm not sure if I get that last point, but yeah, it's complicated, right? Based upon what I've listened to and consumed for content up until this point in time, I do think that there's a version that had Ukraine not been posturing, had Zelensky not flirted with the idea of getting nukes, and again, not that he was going to overnight get nukes or that the U.S. was going to give him nukes, but again, there's a lot of posturing, right? And this feels very reminiscent to what we saw play out in Georgia back in 2008, where honestly, I kind of think the United States or NATO, we kind of edge on these smaller states to, like be the David to Russia's Goliath, but then our hands are kind of tied where we can't justify getting involved to the fullest extent. And so, an analogy I regularly hear is like, this is a case of kick the dog and then blame the dog, right? So like kick the dog until he bites you and then blame the dog for being a mad, rabid dog. I kind of think that our constant demonization of Russia over, the last Cold War period has definitely led us to that moment in time, and understanding that today's Russia isn't the same thing as the USSR. And while, maybe in Putin's wildest fantasies, he would love to see Russia claim back all of the USSR's territories, I don't see it happening. Barring just all out warfare and then NATO refusing to protect like the Polands of the world and the Baltics, I don't see it. And so again, I wish we weren't in this situation, but here we are. So I think the best thing that we can hope for at this moment in time is that everyone de-escalates. I think that there's probably going to be a compromise involved with Russia that right now I don't see Zelensky or the West really pushing for. Again, that's not to say that Putin would accept a compromise either. Who knows? Maybe he wants to take all of Ukraine, but I suspect that if he got a good chunk of all the Russian speaking Ukrainians, the ethnic Russians on the west and kind of coastal regions, I'd be surprised if that wouldn't kind of wrap up this iteration of the conflict. Now, again, does that mean the conflict's going to disappear? No, because honestly, I think that if we did see a partitioning of Ukraine, I'm going to take a little bit here, but if we did see a partitioning of Ukraine, I can't help but think that what we're going to see is like two radicalized versions of Ukraine, right? So we're going to end up with ethnic Russians on the east and south or the coastal area, and then we're going to see ethnic Ukrainian nationalists on the west. Did I say? Yeah. Anyways, the east and south for the Russians and the west for the Ukrainians. And honestly, I think that that's likely going to lead us down a conflict to a future, or down the road to a future conflict where, again, we're going to see if some sort of compromise occurred. I think you're going to see a lot of ethnic Ukrainians very frustrated and angry with that compromise. And I think that we could continue to see certain hostilities in the east and southern parts from Ukrainian nationals if that was to be absorbed by Russia or create like a proxy state or something like that. So I don't know. Geopolitics is a really confusing quagmire, and I personally think that all governments and government agencies are just focused on making it a bigger quagmire. I don't have a silver bullet solution. I don't think anyone does, but I don't think that us going to full-scale war over a regional conflict, like world war over a regional conflict, is going to do anyone any better either. So all I've got is the lesser of different evils. That's my position. Tara says, does everyone realize that Zelensky is a WEF student just like Trudeau? I think we should all be taking close note of that, as we see him being made out to be the golden child. Putin is a tyrant, communist dictator, and a tiger doesn't change his stripes. But it's also interesting how this war all started as soon as the visor data came out that they were begging not to release for 75 years, when everyone would essentially be dead anyways. Yeah, and Brandon, Hunter, Pelosi, the Clintons, and it's a convenient news cycle where the mainstream media and politicians are able to rally around a good guy versus bad guy fight, and a lot of the existing messes they created seem to just kind of disappear. They just fade out. Hey, what's up, Danny? Terry says, police are having a hard time stopping the Bitcoin donations. Yep. Justin Trudeau started off so good, then he turned into a one world government loving socialist. Yeah, and honestly, the more you look into Trudeau, like, yeah, I don't know. I don't think ever he was a great person. I think that in good times, he was the sort of leader that you could be like, yeah, he's maybe a shrug, right? Like, he's probably not going to do anything batshit crazy. He's probably just going to be a little socialist leaning, but like, how much damage is he really going to do? And it turned out, with an emergency or two, he's going to do a lot of damage, actually. All right, guys. Well, I don't think I'm going to be able to catch up to everyone's chats tonight. I really do appreciate everyone jumping in the chat. And reminder, I'm going to keep this live stream rolling, so maybe we'll circle back to more of the chats after this quick little break. But reminder, it's a Mailbag Monday, so I need to go get my stash. I need to grab a piece of mail. I'm going to play the Mailbag theme song for you guys, and I'll be back in a minute.
Welcome to the Mailbag Monday show with your host, Matt McKeever. Let's open some mails, leave some smoke trails. Mailbag Monday. Send Matt a pack and it's gonna be a fun day. Mailbag Monday. Send Matt a pack, live stream every Monday. Mailbag Monday. Send Matt a pack and it's gonna be a fun day. Mailbag Monday. Send Matt a pack, live stream every Monday. Welcome to the live stream. This is Dan the Lost Boy with Project LB52 and Space Monkey Fight Club. Get your avatar and custom song today.
All right, guys, I'm back. Just to make it official, I'm going to change my background here. Feel free to jump in the comments, share any of your thoughts, opinions on any of the articles that we were already discussing earlier tonight. I'm just going to roll a joint as I also just stream a consciousness chat with you guys. Oh, I forgot to grab the letter. I also need to go grab the letter, but want to give a big thanks to someone that recently sent me a little care package in the mail. In case you're curious, I'm going to be smoking the BF for ampersand. So no idea what that means, but I appreciate it. And actually, do I still have that up? Let me quickly see here. Yes. So I wanted to make sure that I wasn't encouraging anyone to do anything illegal. And so I'm almost positive I'm not. So if someone ever claims that I'm encouraging you guys to break the law, I'm not. But those of you that want to send me cannabis, it turns out you can legally mail cannabis to another citizen. So again, this is from the Canada Post website. So up until recently, I've just been kind of using like euphemisms in regard to the Mailbag Monday show, but I decided I should actually kind of look it up. Now, the only thing is you need to figure out the amount of weight you're able to send. I actually couldn't figure that out quickly when I was trying to go, like, this is the Cannabis Act. It's a big act. But anyways, you are allowed to mail it. And as far as receiving it, I almost need to do nothing if I'm just receiving it from an individual. So we're all good. I'm definitely not going to go to jail. And as long as you don't send me too much, you're also not going to get in trouble. I will say, though, just kind of as a side note, I really do appreciate those of you that send me, honestly, just handwritten letters are fantastic, or typed letters are good too. But I also do appreciate the little gifts and the variety of flower that I get to smoke because of this show and what you guys mail in. I definitely, at least unless we know each other IRL or we've interacted in the past, really appreciate just like straight up bud, because like pre-rolled joints or things like that, not that I think anyone would do any shenanigans, but I don't want to accidentally smoke something on air that I didn't realize either. So just putting that out there. But yeah, let me, while I'm grinding this, I'll just go quickly grab this piece of mail and really appreciate Primo who sent this letter to me. And I'm at least going to read a good chunk of it. And I think I can multitask here while I'm grinding. So again, if you guys ever send me a piece of mail and there's parts of it you don't want me to read, just mark it or make me aware somehow in the letter you send. But otherwise, I really do enjoy getting to read these out loud. So, hey, Matt, I've been watching your videos on real estate for some time now. Love the content as it really is geared towards what me and my wife are hitting into, commercial multifamily. Here I am watching content. You mentioned Matt McKeever Unfiltered. So here I am thinking it's going to be a more raw approach to real estate investing and some swear words. Laugh out loud. Was I wrong? And happily so. Your content on that page was in line with me even more as you're a pot smoker and a person who has unplugged from the narrative and moved to a small town to live on your terms. A big high five for that, brother. Appreciate it, Primo. A quick background of how I got started in real estate. It really all started in high school as I was one of many weed dealers. I had great stuff and only really did it to smoke for free. Once things really picked up and I started to make money, I would have that and put it in a shoebox. All right. Well, I'm just going to. I knew to make more money, I had to grow it. So I did. I rented out 3 apartments and a building with 3 bedrooms, and we got to it. Now this was only to make some fast cash and stop. This is what I told my 18-year-old self. Business was great, and I knew I had to get a place of my own. So I bought my first condo at 19 for $140,000 with a VTB. That's awesome, man. I just need to find a filter here. I didn't know what a VTB was, but my agent said I could buy another property if I wanted to without any issue. That's epic. And honestly, a good realtor or a realtor that even just knows a little bit is so valuable. And again, it's one of the biggest mistakes I see people when they get into real estate investing is they hire their cousin, their aunt, their uncle, their grandpa, or whoever who's not a real estate investor, who doesn't really know a lot about real estate investing. And they end up getting subpar advice, in my opinion. So that's awesome to hear. You had a great realtor there, Primo. As the apartments did well, we were naive to what we were doing. One day when I walked out of the elevator on the penthouse floor, I saw police at my door. Oh, fuck, I thought. So I commonly walked back into the elevator. And at that point, I hear, "You stop." I pushed the door closed. I told her to stop on the 10th floor and walk. Okay. Okay, that sounds like a pretty crazy story. I hope that you wanted me to read this out loud because, again, there wasn't anything that told me not to read it. I'm not going to read all of it, though. I'll leave the audience in a little bit of suspense here. But throughout the 2000s, we would buy bungalows and 3plexes in Toronto and convert them into a. Okay. All right. Yeah, maybe I shouldn't read a bunch of this out. I'm definitely not going to dox you in any way, but that's cool. I'm glad to hear that you got value out of my YouTube channel, that you're implementing the BRRRR investment strategies now, and that you're getting into that buy and hold mentality. And that's awesome. You've got 6 properties, which include 2 6plexes in a nearby city. back to where I came across your video and how I disconnected from what's going on in the world. I loved it. And on top of that, you're a cannabis connoisseur. It just made me want to reach out and say hello. This is a thank you care package with a letter that kind of shines a light on who I am and where I'm going and the influence that you had on me. Your boy, Primo. Appreciate that, Primo. And seems like you've got a crazy story. And I'm glad everything worked out. And yeah, that's interesting. Sounds like you're a hustler and an entrepreneur at heart. That's definitely something I can respect. All right. Well, let me see. What else do we got in the comment section? I'm just going to try and hit on a few more comments from comment section before I light up here and get this joint rolled. And then if you guys have, again, anything you want to ask me, anything like that, the whole goal of these Monday night marijuana shows or mailbag shows is just kind of hang out. It's my way of showing you guys I appreciate you spending your time and energy with me. I know there's a lot of things competing for your attention, so the fact you'd spend it with me means a lot. And again, I really do appreciate hearing how me and the team had impact through our real estate investing channel. I hope someday I'll get the satisfaction of having impact in the political world as well through this new YouTube channel and new endeavor. Actually, maybe while I'm doing this, before I get into some of your chats, I'll just share with you guys some of my thoughts on maybe different directions I could take the Maple Pill. I'd love to get your honest feedback. So one, I could literally just keep doing what I'm doing and just try and double down on making some viral clips. And so like by, trying to amp up my personality a bit and try and amp up the humor a bit, maybe write a monologue at the start. That's one of the thoughts. I'm not overly drawn towards that one. Although parts of it are like, I like the idea of forcing myself to write a monologue at the start and things like that. But trying to like be extra just in the hope something goes viral, it doesn't really feel like me, but maybe that would be a more productive avenue to go. Another one that I'm debating with that, again, might just be a little bit hard to execute on the daily is, bringing in someone as like a second chair. So again, a lot of the new shows that I follow on YouTube and stuff like that, and I'd love to hear like, what other shows do you follow? But a lot of the big ones in the States and stuff that you'll see, they usually have like a second or third chair, right? So think about like Tim Pool. He's usually got a guest plus, 2 or 3 other co-hosts on the show with him. With Louder with Crowder, again, he's got a second and third chair, and they even sometimes jump over to the production team for color commentary and things like that. When you're looking at even like Jimmy Dore, who's a bit more centrist, or back in the day we would have called him on the left. I think now you're starting to see him bring on more guests. His producer sometimes or chimes in more. It feels like things like that. So that's another direction I could go where, the natural one would potentially be like Peter or Graham and Aislinn, maybe have them rotate through in a second chair position here as we're kind of going through the news stories and just kind of adding color commentary or hot takes. Another option I've considered that could be done separate or in addition to that is essentially having still the 1 hour news show and then a second hour where we bring on a guest or a second and third chair and kind of riff upon the subject matter and just kind of go a little bit deeper into it. So that's something I'm kind of debating. And then one of the other options, which I think probably this is the best option from like trying to go viral or try and grow my audience, but it just doesn't speak to me the same way, is break up the show and make 5 short clip shows a day. Probably not do them live, so pre-record them, have a single blue pill story, have a single red pill, a single black pill, a single clown pill, and a single white pill story, and just release them as like 2 to 10 minute clips each, and then either go live at the end of the day and have a conversation with you guys about it, or just not have the live stream and interactive thing. The reason I think that theoretically would be the best video, like the best video strategy if my goal was just reach or audience size, is because speaking about an individual subject matter, make those videos like more shareable, because again, like in one of these, I'm going to ramble for an hour about a scatter shot of different stories, and it's never quite as polished, right? There's a lot of stream of consciousness there, where if it was pre-recorded, I could try and make sure like I was a smoother presenter, I guess. So let me know if any of those really speak to you guys, or if you think that I'm overlooking an option to make the maple pill something more. Let me know in that comment section. And I guess one other thing that I'm almost going to do this no matter what, but I think soon I'll just suck it up, pay the couple $100 a year to get a Rumble Pro account and a Gab Pro account, so that I can start uploading videos to Gab and start live streaming on Rumble. Because I've still got that one strike on my on this YouTube channel for community guidelines, where literally all I did was reference a post-millennial article that had the word child sex in it, because it was about the sexualization of children. But that gets you an automatic strike, because the bots just track that. And that was like on March 2nd. So we're literally almost 20 days into this strike, and they still haven't reviewed it. So kind of on borrowed time if they don't review that soon and get rid of it. Oh, I don't have a lighter. All right. BRB, I'm going to play the mailbag song one more time for you guys, and I'll be back with a lighter, hopefully.
Welcome to the Mailbag Monday Show with your host, Matt McKeever. Let's open some mails, leave some smoke trails. Mailbag Monday. Send Matt a pack and it's gonna be a fun day. Mailbag Monday. Send Matt a pack, live stream every Monday. Mailbag Monday. Send Matt a pack and it's gonna be a fun day. Mailbag Monday. Send Matt a pack, live stream every Monday. Welcome to the live stream. This is Dan the Lost Boy with Project LB52 and Space Monkey Fight Club. Get your avatar and custom song today.
All right, so huge shout out to our boy Dan the Lost Boy. He's my business partner on the Project LB52, which is the custom audio creation NFT project that we currently have on the go. And that essentially is just a quick little sample of his music abilities. He's also the one that sings and performs the Maple Pill theme song that you guys hear at the start of a lot of these shows. Pretty much every show that I remember to get my audio configuration set up on. And if you guys want to actually, let me pull this up. And then I'll jump back into the comments in a second. But if you guys ever want to see what's, oh, this is a different browser. But if you guys ever want to see what's in my OpenSea wallet, you can always just look for Sheer Punks there. I'm just going to open it up, and literally in my wallet is one of our Project LB52 passes that has my custom audio song. I actually haven't listened to it on OpenSea, so I hope this all works the way I think it should.
Yeah. Asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chat, believing in my own will. Where fire, meth, people scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill. Need to come and take it if you wanna mess with my hill. We've been 3D printing, setting ready for that ghost kill. Angry at the man, so I'm swallowing the black pill. Stacking sats, beaming back, NPCs getting ill. Lost at the narrative, crusty on that clown pill. It's my health, my wealth, grinding.
So yeah, if you guys ever want to hear the full song, you can find it there on OpenSea. And essentially, I now own the commercial rights to that song, so I can put it up on iTunes, Spotify, all that stuff. I can monetize it. I can use it as my theme song on my show. So I really am proud of this project and my business partner, Dan, in particular. Although, man, I'm just really disorganized right now. I just realized I don't have an ashtray. So I'm going to have to go off screen here for a sec. Stretch. There we go. Got it. All right. I think I've got my shit sorted out now. So let's get the screen share off. We'll jump back into the comments. Again, appreciate you guys making this a two-way conversation. Wow. We're already an hour and 44 minutes into this. All right. Who else do we got in the chat here? Terry says, I still try to give everyone the time of day. It's challenging to respect others' views at times. It's all perspective to the info you get. Keep it cool. Yeah, that's good advice. And honestly, I know that there's a better version of me that wouldn't get as upset or froth at the mouth at some of the stupidity I see in the world. And I just need to become a better person in order to be more balanced, because while, you know, taking pot shots or ridiculing someone or making jokes can be a good outlet, usually we're not going to convince anyone of our position, and when we trigger their defenses like that. So, all right, we've got Danny. Nothing in Canada is protecting anymore other than politicians. Pierre is also part of WEF. Yeah, and you know, I think there's different levels of involvement with WEF, at least based upon my cursory research, right? So I don't think WEF is above like clout chasing. So I think anyone that's ever attended something of theirs that that they can like get some clout or make it seem like they're a bigger deal than they are, I think they're very happy to do that. At the same time, we've got people like Chrystia Freeland, who's obviously very deeply integrated, right? She's been attending their events since like the late aughts or early like 20 teens. Actually, yeah, because her book was written in 2012. So I think that like, you know, 2008, 2009, she was attending WEF events, if I'm not mistaken. I think she's on like one of their boards, right? Or she's a trustee or something like that. Yeah, so I think there is a scale to WEF involvement, but I think if a politician isn't willing to just say where he stands on WEF's policies, that tells us everything we need to know about that politician. So I haven't heard Pierre say yay or nay on the WEF front. So I'd love to see sometime someone actually hit him with that, right? And for him to answer. And I think that would really tell us where he stands. Leah says, I'm a union electrician and we have a no strike clause because our membership is lazy and chose to continue that at the end of last year, regardless of how low our increases have been. And regardless of the fact that we can negotiate first of all trades and any logic, we have a Me Too clause wherein we get $1 an hour more if another trade negotiates higher, and they are all asking for at least $10 over 3 years. Our settlement was $6 over 3 years. Interesting. Really appreciate you sharing that. And yeah, I don't know a lot about union life. I've never been part of a union. So that is interesting. Glad to hear you guys have that like drag along or come along clause where at least if someone else gets more, you're able to get more as well. Terry says, Pierre sounds nice at times, but he sets off the radar for me. Matt's right. He's got a place maybe, but not PM. Yeah, like, you know, if tomorrow Max Bernier was to end up Prime Minister of Canada and he chose to like make Pierre his finance minister, I'd be like, okay, this is interesting, you know? But I really do want to think he's got good intentions. And I really do want to think deep down he's orange pilled, but I don't know if he'd be willing to sacrifice his political career always for what's right. Because if he was, I think he would have already done it by now. And so I think I skimmed over it, but I saw someone mention like Roman Baber was going to be running as well. Yeah, if I had to give my hot take, I don't think that he's a high chance to win just because there's so many other candidates in this race. And I think a lot of them have bigger publicity machines behind them, right? So Charest, obviously, he's got mainstream media's desire to push him. Pierre Poilievre, I think, has been building a grassroots network and movement for a while now. And so I think Roman's unfortunately going to be playing catch up. But if I had to pick the leader out of the leaders that are currently running, I'd need to listen more to Roman, but I really like what his actions have been up until this point in time. So I'd want to dive deeper into his policies to get a firm understanding, but his actions seem to, belie or show a person that actually has lines in the sand, is willing to sacrifice personal gain for what he believes to be the greater good. And these days, it's almost the exact opposite amongst politicians, right? Where they're willing to virtue signal for the greater good, but they'll never actually take personal sacrifices, right? The same way that, whether it's in the US or Canada, we see politicians giving themselves raises during the pandemic. Meanwhile, a lot of the people who they created policies to save find themselves in worse financial positions. I couldn't find any link between Pierre and WEF. Can anybody share the source? I think just on WEF's website, if I'm not mistaken, I think they've got a 1-line bio, if I remember. And so again, I think anyone that attends anything, they're willing to put on their website, but I could be wrong there. Danny says he was on the WEF website until last year. Oh, interesting. All right. Well, appreciate you hanging out with us, Danny. And we'll see what else is going on here. Farzana remasking, the director of my kid's daycare straight up told me that when I enter the daycare to drop off, pick up kids, I need to mask up for those 5 minutes while I'm inside. It's a sad state of affairs we find ourselves in, and I don't think anyone's better for it. I'm so against children wearing masks that I literally feel like there would have been. I'm positive for myself that I would have ended up with a learning disability or something like that if you couldn't see people's expressions and faces for a couple years during your fundamental growth. Now, again, I'm sure that there's lots of things parents can do to focus on outside the classroom to try and put their kids in a better position that way. But any child that already was struggling, that, was in speech therapy and stuff like that, I think that they're just going to find themselves, if not falling behind, they're going to be working so much harder in order to stay in place and not fall behind. Graham says, why would anyone trust the government at this point? Either history or you trust the government. I agree. I had to ask if this was policy and why. After a bit of open conversation, I was told it's okay to not wear the mask. I hate confrontation. It makes me uncomfortable, but these conversations need to. Yeah, take place. 100% agree. And just want to, tip the hat to you, Farzana, for having that conversation, because you're not alone amongst Canadians that don't want to have those confrontations, right? But as we were hearing in that quote from oh man, I haven't even smoking that much weed. Jordan Peterson, and him talking about how psychopaths can essentially dominate agreeable personalities. I personally think a lot of the petty tyranny we see, right? When you've got the Walmart manager that's screaming at you about how you need to be masked and you're putting other people's lives at risk. And you're like, lady, maybe you should just lose 100 pounds and you wouldn't be so scared of COVID. But yeah, I think that we need to be willing to have those confrontations in society. I don't think they ever need to escalate to violence, but I think we need to be comfortable having someone judge us. And honestly, for so many people now, that's such a scary thought, right? That they'll bow down to the collective consciousness. They'll try and preempt themselves. They'll admit to thought crimes. They'll admit to privilege. They'll do a lot of silly things in order to just try and not be judged by their fellow citizen. And I personally think that this is probably just hardwired into our brains, right? Through evolutionary biology, where, being ostracized from the tribe literally was a matter of life and death, right? If you got ostracized by the tribe, if you were considered to be the weak link or the constant troublemaker, they could just boot your ass out. And it was hard going alone. It's always been hard going alone. And I think that that's why so many of us now need to focus on building strong social connections amongst like-minded individuals, and why we need to focus on building parallel institutions. I think homeschooling your kids, I know that that's a tall order for people, but just think about what's actually going on, right? Just think about what they're actually focused on teaching your kids. Think about where their priorities actually line up. And while we may not have fully capitulated to woke culture here in Canada yet, we are on that trajectory, and that should scare all of us. But secondly, just look at where teachers land, right? The teachers' unions have been fighting tooth and nail to keep things like social distancing, keep things like mask mandates, virtual learning, and none of this is for the safety of the children, right? Even a cursory glance at the data, you would quickly come to the conclusion this isn't about saving children, at least. And so at best, it's teachers just trying to save their own asses. But I honestly think it's most of them just giving in to the collective pressure and choosing to be agreeable. And there's probably just a minority of tyrants amongst their ranks. And everyone's just bowing down to that. And if they're willing to bow down on masking children and vaccine mandates and all the craziness that we've seen over the last 2 years, they will absolutely bow down to woke culture when woke culture comes for their institution or their classroom. So I think either way, parents, you may not like it, but you've got a greater obligation these days to be involved in your child's education. I think ideally that is homeschooling or private school. I don't think that like expensive private schools inherently mean that your kid's getting a leg up. And it's not inherently a guarantee that they're not going to be exposed to wokeism either. But finding a community of like-minded parents, focusing on homeschooling together, I think that needs to become the norm. I think we need to take that back. The education institutions, just the idea that you ship your kid off for 18 years, right, between grade school, high school, and university, is that about 18 years or whatever? The idea that that's normalized, that the vast majority of the kids' waking hours are spent in a government institution that's just designed to indoctrinate them, right, is very concerning, in my opinion. And again, I don't think it was maybe I'm just a crotchety old man. I don't think it was as bad when I was growing up, but I still don't think it was actually good. I don't think it was a net negative. I think it was almost like treading water. And certainly the hard part is I think we still do want like public education available to a certain extent. That role can probably be solved by charities and the free market if we were to allow it to really open up. I understand the desire to want a social safety net, and I do think that a population that can read and write and do arithmetic is better off than a population that can't. But I also think that doesn't inherently just by default make you a better society. And I think that we sometimes jump to conclusions there where certain types of knowledge or certain types of skills are prioritized so much. And again, that doesn't mean we need to start like trying to be the great equalizer. We can allow the free market to dominate, but we just need to really allow the free market to take its role. Leah says, FYI, Roman Baber is supposed to be running for PM as well. Yep, definitely heard that. Let's see. I might just jump down a little bit further. What's up? We got Hungarian Experiment. Hell yeah, time to smoke. Appreciate it. We got Step. Welcome back, Matt. Sorry for the pre-rolls. They were saying, oh no, like I know you, Steven, so I have no concerns over that. But you know, literally if someone that had never interacted with me before mailed me a pre-roll, I'd be a little bit more cautious. So again, like if I know you guys from a bunch of Zoom calls or coaching sessions, or if you've literally just been a day one commenter, I've got no sweat or stress over that. But again, I look forward to getting to the point where just packages show up randomly at the Citadel, and at the same time, like the thing that makes me think of it is, I think Peter has talked about this on his YouTube channel, or we've talked about it somewhere, but he had someone like send him mushrooms, and they were just extremely potent. And like, you know, in the wrong headspace, you can start to like question like, oh my goodness, these are too potent, right? And you start to you know, sweat yourself or stress yourself out, and you can create a negative feedback loop there for yourself. So again, half joking, but also straight up flower for strangers. That's a policy here now. But again, if I know you guys from coaching sessions or IRL, I trust you. All right. Yeah, I don't know if I had too much else that necessarily wanted to chat with you guys. I see Sean Sound said 100% agree with you. Canada should have a Second Amendment. I do really think that that's a great equalizer and balance. Again, the same logic that we hear American politicians, like Republicans particularly, and libertarians argue for gun rights, is the same reason right now we see the Ukrainian government wanting to arm their citizenry, right? It's the reason why we see progressives on the left right now supporting the idea of arming the citizenry, because, you know, as Japan commented in regards to World War II and the prospect of invading continental America, they're like, behind every blade of grass would be a gun. And yeah, that would be the case. And yeah, if you were looking to invade and try and occupy a country, that would be a major deterrent. And it is a major deterrent, right? It's reason why like places like Afghanistan are very difficult to quell insurrections, or different parts of the Middle East. So I do think we'd be well served to have a Second Amendment in Canada. And I think any society that truly wants to be free and have that balance. Now, again, does that mean that there's potentially societal cost to more guns? Yeah, I think that, you know, it'd be naive to think that if ever, as we heard even just in that Jordan Peterson quote, 3% of the population is often psychopaths, right? Or 1 to 5%. So again, do you run the risk that there could be tragedy, that there could be costs associated with that policy? Absolutely. But when balancing freedom and safety, I think you always have to err on the side of safety, or err on the side of freedom. Literally said the opposite of what I meant there. Because there's always another emergency, because there's always another boogeyman, because we can always try and be safer. And so for that, they can use that justification for anything and everything. And some of the anti-hate speech laws that we see them trying to roll out here in Canada, it's literally going to destroy and erode all free speech. And I think there's a very specific reason freedom of speech comes number one, and the Second Amendment is number two, right? Like, you need to back that shit up. Because again, the moment they start to challenge your free speech is when you need to start really challenging the regime, in my opinion. And if you don't have the means to keep them honest, you're not going to keep them honest. And even when you've got the means, it's very difficult. But I think there's a certain amount of hesitation to just outright tyranny that occurs in countries with a lot of guns held by the citizenry versus countries that don't. I know it's kind of cliched at this point in time, but like, look at New Zealand and Australia as examples, right? All right. Well, I appreciate you guys hanging out with me. Again, if you guys enjoyed this, please, smash that like button, hit subscribe, all that good stuff. Oh, that stays in front, eh? Hope you guys enjoyed this Mailbag Monday. If you guys think I should keep this as a separate show, let me know. I'm kind of indifferent at this point in time, but I just heard from a few of you guys that were like, why make me join a second stream when I was already on your first stream? I was like, yeah, that seems pretty logical. I can't argue with that. If you've got feedback for the show, as we talked about some of those different ideas, I'd love to get your feedback. So let me know whether you're watching this live or after the fact. And we'll be back tomorrow with another episode of The Maple Pill, same time, same place, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And again, don't let this show ever be the end of your information gathering journey, right? Let this just be the jumping off point. But with that, let's play ourselves out.
As masking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chap, believing in my own will. Wet fire, math, evil scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill. Need to come and